Texas is where I want to be. It's the only place for me where my spirit can be free. Texas.
Woo! I love that. And here I am in Austin, Texas. Welcome everybody. The Digital-Roundtable is on. The crew is here. We have a great guest today. And let me just go around real quick and acknowledge my dear crew and buddies. And so, John, how are you today?
I'm just fine. Been a busy day, just keeping up with the Longhorns and my classes at the University of Texas, writing some books and going stir crazy here in the house.
Like everybody else. Llewelyn, how are you today?
Very well, with all of the same complaints about being stir crazy, locked in, missing normal human contact, and wondering when it's all going to end.
How is the weather up there?
It's gorgeous today. I, of course, am inside talking to you, but it's very pretty outside. Sun is shining. It's quite glorious. Outside the window here is a river and beautiful. We still have some color in the trees. The leaves most of them have not turned yet, and nothing but the best at the moment.
All right. Bud, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. I am actually calling you and joining you today from Waukesha, Wisconsin, the home of Generac, who's our new owner.
All right, fantastic. Yeah. You're what we call North Texas.
Yeah, Wisconsin, North Texas.
Llewelyn is in Rhode Island, and we call that East Texas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and of course I'm from Colorado, so is that West Texas?
It's a little Northwest Texas, yeah.
You may notice, Bud, that this is a pretty Texas-centric program.
When I go to Colorado to play golf,
deflate the Texas.
when I go to Colorado to play golf, they're all from Texas anyway. All the houses are from Texas. They're just
so
for a while.
So you all really want to meet Bud Voss. Bud is a great guy, and he has been the CEO of Imbala Power Networks for a while now. He'll tell us about that later. And before that, he's been in the industry for a long time, but he worked at a company called Converge that got acquired by Itron after he left. And he's been, daydreaming like many people, what the grid of the future looks like. And he's gone at it for multiple angles. And I think he's done a phenomenal job of realizing the vision, even though him and I would probably agree, more him than I, that the market is slow to change, even though it is happening.
It is happening, absolutely. Yeah. But it is slow to change. Back when Andres was an executive at a little known utility down in Texas, we used to, Andres, our joke that we used to say about you there? Not you per se, but
yeah.
because you're definitely having fun, is do you know how a utility executive commits suicide?
Yeah, I do, but tell us how.
Jumps in front of a glacier. Now, I will say that joke really applied about 20 years ago. I think the glaciers are moving a lot faster now, so maybe that's not still true. I also think the utilities are changing a lot faster these days. And so I have been coming at this from many different angles for many different years. 5 different companies in this space, Converge being one, now Imbala / Generac. And it's a good time. It's great people. And we are trying to solve one of the world's most complex problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get into that. So before we get there, though, let me review what's happened in the last 7 days. So COVID plots along, and the death toll is almost 220,000. And the cases are about 8.2 million almost. Things are slightly, the cases are trending up, the deaths are slightly slowing down. A lot of people are saying that we're about to have another peak here. Not clear what's happening really on that front. It's all mixed reviews everywhere. And then in terms of some of the financial indicators, stocks markets are a little flat from last week. The Dow, the New York Exchange Index, and the NASDAQ. The price of oil crude, it's 87 cents up, so slightly up. How I think it should be, trending up. Price of gas, believe it or not, in the greater Austin is 8 cents down from last week at $1.59. I mean, who would have thought? I remember when George W. won the election and the price of gas was at $1.89 in 2000. I mean, it's cheaper today than in 2000. Who would have ever thought? And obviously, you know, jobs and what's going to happen with the airlines and things. And there's a new package being negotiated in Congress, another relief package and the like. And I think the winter is coming, and a lot of companies are probably in trouble running out of their savings and what have you. So, John, what do you think? How are we doing? What's happening in this week? What's going on at UT, and what can you share?
And of course, what's happening with the virus is interesting. It's sort of like the stimulus money, the proposed stimulus money. If you look at what's happening in the economy, and I think, of course, the economy is a reflection of the virus, which has really caused us to, quote, shut down so that we can delay the infections of people. But it's very interesting to watch how the stimulus money is related to the economy. Then, of course, we have the election going on, and how all of that is related to the virus. So when you look at the news and you read the paper, it's obvious that some people believe that this virus is the flu, and really it's not as powerful as it is. Of course, we have leaders who are saying that it's not really anything, that we can get by it and don't let it get you down. So I think the top story is, if you look at the stock market now from that point of view, is how the stimulus money, since it is being really delayed, then it's having a big, huge impact on how we think about the economy and in this case, the stock market. But the big issue still is the number of people who are losing their jobs, or losing their livelihoods. And there's always a bifurcation about those who work in places where there's a lot of contact. But the economy overall, because like in Austin, I guess about 52% of people can work at home. But on the other hand, people who cannot work at home, it's still a tragedy to watch people lose their homes and to lose their livelihood. And I think all this is wrapped around the fact that people are just getting sick and tired of the reality of the virus. If you look at my students, I can tell that there's a tiresome effect, if you will, when they come online to take classes. So we're living in very troublesome times. And the big issue is, if we get a vaccine, or if the virus goes away, which I think we have another year or so of this, what will be the impact when it's all over? We're going to have lost jobs, we're going to have new business models, we're going to have new companies that emerge. And more importantly, I think we have a new outlook in America, much like we did probably after the Kennedy assassination.
Llewelyn?
Well, as usual, I agree with John. I don't know why. I don't agree with him about Texas, but about everything else. And if I could just get him out of Texas, my God, would form such a team. However, he's right. We're just beginning to realize that this virus is going to be with us a long time. And I disagree with John that maybe a year. I think it's going to be with us for 2-3 years. But first of all, we don't know about a vaccine. We don't know how effective. We don't know about the delivery of it. It has to be very carefully looked after. Whoever's vaccine it is, it has to be delivered in almost cryogenic state. These things can go wrong very easily. We have no experience and no infrastructure for handling this kind of inoculation, which is going to have to take place. We also have this resistance to the idea that the virus is a problem. We have people who refuse to take simple precautions. It's been vastly fanned by political irresponsibility, the chances are that almost a third of the population will not want to get the vaccine, even when it's here and proven to work. This all seems to me cannot be accomplished. Bringing them around, eradicating the virus cannot be accomplished in just 1 year. I also think that there are going to be structural changes in the economy that are not quite clear yet, one of which is how many people are really going to go back to their offices. I was on a boat launch on the Hudson River this weekend, and we went around Manhattan, which is awesome, absolutely awesome. From the days when I used to go there frequently or when I lived there, it has grown tremendously. The new building is stunning, but you look at these buildings and you wonder, will they have anybody in them? Because what they are is primarily office space, an awful lot of office space. And you wonder whether those offices will be occupied. You wonder about the future of retail. You also wonder, believe it or not, about this Christmas, whether with so much purchasing taking place online, apparently there's some doubt whether the delivery services, the post office, UPS, Federal Express, can keep up. And they're saying maybe they cannot guarantee deliveries in the Christmas period. The tough period between Thanksgiving and Christmas is going to be hell on delivery systems. So there are lots of unknowns and lots of uncertainties. I think when we come out of this, and my bet is it'll be 2 to 3 years, not one, alas, that we'll see some structural changes. I think we will change our healthcare system. I'm not sure to what. The deficiencies in it are becoming more clear every day as the virus proceeds. We will see a new reverence for expertise. We'll see a much greater emphasis on biotechnological research. We will also start looking for new ways of employing those people who are permanently disadvantaged by the virus, those jobs that have disappeared and will not come back. Mm-hmm. And we'll see a new and I think very overdue emphasis on artisans, the trades, that kind of work, which has been rather denigrated by society for way too long. And I think we'll see more respect for the trades and maybe less respect and maybe fewer liberal arts graduates. Something like 20 universities just in New England are in financial trouble, and quite a lot of them will have to close or consolidate.
Right. But I assume that you probably have a different outlook, but what do you think? COVID, the economy, are things trending up? Is digitalization king of the hill, accelerating things? What's your take?
So I think three things that I think are important, and one of those I think relates to the business that we're now part of, which is people are just staying home. And there's a theme, by the way, within Generac, our new acquirer, which they call home as the sanctuary. And that's, I think, what's become an interesting realization by people and their families is that if I'm A, going to work from home, and B, I may never return to the office, I'm going to invest in my home. And so maybe they're doing that through landscape projects and other things around their house, home improvement, whatnot. Some are doing it through other ways, solar, batteries, maybe even saying I'm going to invest in an electric vehicle because I'm not going to be commuting as far. So from an electric grid perspective, the world that I come from, I think this actually will have a profound change on our grid. It's going to change the shape of how energy is used through the course of the day and consumed by different consumers. And it all comes back to that home as a sanctuary kind of theme that I tend to agree with the statements that the vaccine and changes to this. The second key comment is I think it's going to take longer than we expect. I think people are settling into this idea that we're going to be dealing with this for a long time, which again perpetuates this idea that, hey, people are going to do a lot more from home and they're going to invest a lot more in their homes than they are in their remote place of work. And then the third thing I would tell you is, having been running a small company and with a group of about 60 different employees trying to change the world, so to speak, in software and the work that we do. But again, with large utilities, who, by the way, are just some of the greatest customers we've ever had, you know, there is an element of fatigue. There's absolutely COVID fatigue setting in. It's setting in the workplace. And I think we should see an influx of, you know, support infrastructure for companies like ours and for our employees. And whether that's social in nature, or whether that's even mental health, there is an absolute element of fatigue that has set in, and we've got to support our employee base, and we've got to help our families more, because they're dealing now with more things than they ever had to deal with. So it's a realization I've seen in terms of just running the company, running Imbala, and working with our employee base.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask you one simple question. So if the vaccine was available today, would you take the vaccine, yes or no? John?
Yes.
Llewelyn?
Yes, absolutely.
But
I'm going to say yes.
okay.
I know I'm hesitating on that one, but I'm going to say yes. I would prefer to see a different administration running that organization. I'll just leave it at that.
I don't think the politicians are in charge of that, so don't worry about it. So a couple of things that we do here, Bud. We talk a lot about what are the examples of digital transformation. They're all around us, what's happening. We tend to sort of opine about those. And clearly one of the things that we have said from day one, and when we started broadcasting in April, was that COVID is accelerating a lot of adoption, a lot of usage, like Zoom. Everybody's an expert in Zoom now, even though you and I have been doing, conferencing forever, because, virtual teams all over the world. And so it seems like to a lot of people that this is new because of Zoom, but it's been around for 50 years. But we now have, a lot of acceleration happening. So one of the things that we track is changes in telecom. And so in the last 7 days, Google and AT&T have been going at it publicly around CBRS licenses, and AT&T has finally launched an entire team effort. I think there are probably around 1,000 folks behind that new business unit to stand up private networks. Ooh, the wireless carriers standing up private networks. Ooh, it's fascinating, right? And this is going on in Europe. Samsung is doing it, and Ericsson is doing it, and Nokia is doing it in Europe and all over the world, and Verizon is starting to talk about doing it here in the US. And so clearly, private LTE, whatever flavor of 5G is going to come down, seems to be up and up. Also, an interesting news, clearly we had the Apple iPhone introduction. I hear the rumor mill says that the 5G Apple iPhone is going to be off the charts in terms of orders. But an interesting thing, Nokia just won a deal with NASA. NASA basically did an RFP for a company to build the first private LTE network in the moon. And Nokia has won the deal. NASA is going to build a private LTE network in the moon, and we're going to colonize the moon. This is happening. As George Salazar told us in our keynote at the Digital 360 Summit back in August. But do you think that the acceleration is there on the comms infrastructure? Do you see real-time controls being benefited by private LTE, private networks, 5G? Is this the missing piece to have that real-time grid on the edge overtaking the center utility scale thing? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think we've ever seen, at least in our business, trying to harness flexibility of assets that sit at the grid edge. We've not seen that telecom has been the limiter in that for our adoption itself. I think there are probably other business models and probably other parts of the utility sector that has been the limiter, but that hasn't been a limiter for us. And part of that is because we don't use massive amounts of data. We don't move don't move movies, we don't move, audio files or video files. And when you look at the advances in 5G and some of these other, networking technologies, that they're really built around bandwidth, right? And so our biggest challenge has always just been a latency problem. And then how do you use advanced software to be able to deal with those types of latency and controls problems? But the access to communications has not been a problem for us per se. Now, let me just shift gears for a minute and talk about it from this perspective, which is we typically serve the largest utilities that are out there. So, very, very large customers like Portland General Electric and Austin Energy and Eversource, et cetera. These are in highly densely populated communities, areas where telecommunications is well accessed. These are not your rural cooperatives, your rural type of utilities. So there probably is an advantage in those sectors that we've just not seen. Is going to be access to telecommunications technology that maybe they didn't have for those very, very remote type of applications.
Right. Could you share for 30 seconds, and I'm sure that John and Llewelyn will chime in with some more questions, the success of Imbala, if you can summarize it, the last 4 years of hard work that you've put there, and why partner with Generac? Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's a huge success story for the digital conversation, the transformation conversation, but really what we call the grid edge, right? And what's happening at the grid edge. And Imbala is a company, I joined it about 6 years ago, and it's definitely been a journey to start with a company that had been operating in a particular area with particular technology, but really hadn't had a lot of traction. And we had to pivot that company and change that company to work in a different area with a different business model and a different customer set. And honestly, we've grown the company very successfully over sort of the last 4.5 to 5 years as we've made that transition, started reinvesting in the company, the technology, and the team. And we were looking at a point, roughly starting about 9 months ago, maybe 12 months ago, we started looking at what is it going to take for Imbala to take the next big step in scale. And so we started looking for partners that could bring us scale. And when you think of companies out there that can bring the scale, it's all about the assets and it's about the customer base. We have the utility side of that equation pretty well down, but we didn't have the end customer side or the asset side of it totally licked, so to speak. So Generac became a fantastic partner in that quest. And through the course of a lot of conversations and a lot of discussions, we decided that, hey, this was a 1 + 1 = 3 equation if we put the two companies together. So we merged, we formally announced about 2 weeks ago that we were merging with Generac, and we've brought the company into Generac. Good news story here, though, I think, is that they want us to accelerate our business plan. They're looking at different ways that we can invest, different ways that we can grow. We're actually keeping the Imbala name, and we're keeping the entire Imbala team together as an independent operating unit within Generac. So, now we've got this giant big brother to support us, and we can just go do, great stuff together.
Awesome. Any questions, guys?
Well, when you look at your question and everything that's going on, it's obvious that America needs a solid state smart grid. It's obvious that for the most part, the grid is running on a transformer power grid and it needs to be smart. And I think that if we look at all the technology that's sitting on the shelf, we're way behind in the sense that if we look at the grid edge, I think the researchers have created the transformation technology necessary to make the grid smart. That is to change the grid edge, the edge of the grid edge, and to make it very, very smart. So as I like to say, that America is completely hooked with the smart grid. Just as we did with computers years ago, so that we know where every piece of electricity, quote unquote, is. We know what's happening in California when people try to put energy back on the grid, and that's why California burns down. And so my question is, do you think that the technology already exists out there in the research labs and the scientists to transform the grid completely in America to go to a complete solid state smart grid?
Yeah, so it's a fascinating question. And I think I think, part of it is about, I view it in kind of breaking it up into three different buckets of core technology that has to be brought to bear. The first is around sensing and being able to sense what's happening either on the distribution grid or at the person's home. I do think there's a lot of technology out there, whether it's in the lab form or even already commercialized. One of the most powerful elements of this is synchrophasers. And the ability to actually sense true phase angle, voltage, current, et cetera, throughout the entire distribution feeder. That's something we've not really tried to do within the North American electric grid. We've done it at the transmission level, but we've not done it at the distribution level. That fundamental piece is there, though. It exists. We need to continue to take cost out of that. We need to continue to, and as we continue to drive more costs down, we will be able to then deploy more and more of that technology in volume at the distribution side of it. By the way, there is an interesting connection back to the conversation about telecommunications networks, because those devices typically have to be time synchronized, which means it has a different element of telecommunications that need to be brought to bear. The second element that I think is important is actually asset technology. So just like we've seen the drop in solar prices, we're going to see batteries and other technologies follow a similar curve. And that's going to drive consumer adoption, whether that's in the vehicle or in the home or near the home. You're going to see that adoption curve absolutely drive. And then, so those two things I think have to come together to create a real solid state grid. And then the last piece is going to be software technology. And you've got to be able to do the massive amounts of data analysis, data mining, and then ultimately controls, which is one of the key elements of the grid piece, is we then have to control all of this stuff in order to make it all work together. And you're going to do that through software. And that software piece exists as well. So it's companies, a lot of large companies, I think, coming together, starting to see a huge opportunity in this space. And it used to be very niche. Small little companies, frankly, like an Imbala and some of our competitors, now coming together with big companies like this. There was another announcement earlier this week of a company called AMS who got acquired by Fluence, which is a joint venture with Siemens, right? Small little company called Siemens. And so we're starting to now see, I think, the technology come together with much bigger companies with a lot more capability to start truly moving towards that solid state grid.
So the investment in such a situation would be just tremendous. If you're right. I mean, it's got to be controlled. You have the power grids at the edge. It's got to be smart. Therefore, it can be hacked. Yeah. But if you look at the return on the investment with the data that is produced, and you look at everything from the customer side, the houses and the sensors in the houses, and et cetera, because as you know, not only is all of this coming together, but people like Amazon and Google are getting in the grid business. And those kind of things.
Absolutely, and I guess I'll just add, I open the show with a little joke about utility executives that I probably should take back. But I think the funny thing is, as I said, that's a 20-year-old view, honestly, that is still somewhat true. And one of the problems with utilities today, one of the challenges they have, is that they're still living in a regulatory construct that is 20 years old. Sure. And so it's really not their fault, right? They're slow to change and slow to adopt, not because they want to be slow. It's because the structure that they live in, it prohibits them from moving quickly. So there is a regulatory element of this, whether that's state mandated, legislatively driven, or driven through national associations of regulatory commissioners, where we can actually say we're going to take our hands off the utility and let them go move as fast as an Amazon or a Google, because they can. Those executives want to do that. They just can't. Sure. Llewelyn, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I have a question, several actually. First off, what are the utilities and what do you see the technology fix for the physical weaknesses in the grid? We still have a situation where if there's terrible weather, we lose power. This is not really acceptable when you get into a world that's totally dependent on electricity, a very smart world. The second, as you said initially, that there was not a lot of data moved in utilities, and then you laid out a few minutes later the case for huge data moving in utilities, with sensors on everything. That sounds data, and that sounds like you need some sort of network on which to move that data. And the other thing is, if you move that data on a conventional network, even if it's got a special set aside for that purpose, it is still vulnerable to any sort of cybersecurity attack.
Yep.
Deal with that. And we still don't have a good fix as to, in a cybersecurity attack, what we will do and how we can get the grid back up and running very, very quickly, because we know what will happen. I was in New York in 1965 with a big blackout, but we were a more peaceful place there. People walked in the street and tried to help each other. Now I think they'll walk in the street looking for a shop to break into. It's a different world, and we could not stand the social dislocation, which is almost inevitable now in a blackout situation.
Yeah. So, I mean, great questions, great observations. And ultimately it comes back to, there's one other aspect to it, which we talked about before, which is this whole COVID thing. It's also creating, we're now living at home more. And so a blackout or, an old aged infrastructure that's above ground, that is exposed to natural disasters, and likewise, it's actually really disruptive. It's really disruptive to our lives. And I think the other thing we're seeing is just broadly within the climate change realm, that these storms are becoming more frequent and more powerful, right? So you have all of these things coming together. I think ultimately, there's only two paths that you can ultimately take. The first one is we can invest probably trillions of dollars. I don't know what the number would be, but it's probably trillions of dollars to underground all of these systems and put them in the ground where they're safer and less vulnerable to these types of things. The other way to look at it is go back to investing on the edge of the grid, because if we can make the edge, meaning the customer's home or business, more reliable, more resilient, and we can do that through clean technologies, decarbonized technologies such as solar on the roof, a battery in the garage, and maybe a backup generator that can help you in those really extreme conditions. What you've done is you've now decentralized the grid, and you've actually made it far more resilient, which we know from networking technologies. When you decentralize anything, it's far more resilient to any single point of failure. So that's fundamentally the world that we come from, and it's actually our new owner. It's a fundamental concept that they come from, is this idea that through decentralization, we can make a far more resilient and reliable grid. The data question that you brought up, it's absolutely true that all of these things and these sensors and devices and elements create a massive amount of data volume. And the good news is again, if you're in a decentralized world and you're using decentralized telecommunications networks, you're helping to spread that demand across an entire network area. So that certainly helps. I think that encryption technology is key. Obviously, from a security standpoint, I won't say that I'm a cybersecurity expert of any way, shape, or form. However, I can tell you that this is where that private network piece, if you have really valuable assets and you want to put in more layers of security and more layers of the onion, if you will, around that thing, you're going to go down a private security path. But security just has to be baked in from day one. It has to be in every tool set and every element of the actual system that's being built, whether that be encryption or personal security around private data. If the company that's designing that technology hasn't thought about it from day one, then you've probably already lost the battle.
Yeah, let me pause real quick and take my 30 seconds to do my regular announcement. And so for all those of you who are joining us, you're probably aware of the fact that we had our second annual virtual conference, the Digital 360 Summit in August, and it was fantastic. We had a phenomenal attendance, 900 folks register, over 70 speakers, and it was a great program. We're working on publishing the 28 videos that came out of it, and some 11 white papers that we're working on to publish. And it was, again, a raving event, and Llewelyn and John had an opportunity to share in the smart cities. This is a list of folks that were on stage speaking. Love to see Imbala next year join the fray. And then we have announced the 2021 edition is going to be face-to-face, God willing, under COVID guidance, May 18th, 19th, and 20th at the Embassy Suites in San Marcos. The Digital 360 Summit is co-produced and jointly managed by Texas State University, who is also our sponsor for the Digital Roundtable. I want to thank them again for doing that. And so let me come back and share a couple of things that I see happening. But in CMG company that I run focuses on smart utilities, smart buildings, smart cities, and the sort of the vortex of those things coming on. And you have been with Imbala on the smart sort of power utility side of things. I would imagine that gas utilities and water utilities at some point may have a need, if they do DG and stuff, for you capabilities as well. But partnering with Generac pushes you into the whole smart city, smart building side of the equation with those large customers. What do you think? What do you think is happening there? Clearly, a lot of stuff is going on. Standards, business models, lots of opportunities. Those three worlds are still coming together. And a lot of people say that it's going to take a while. There's more adoption to happen, more sort of synergy on coming together and how things fit. But clearly in smart cities, EVs, electric vehicles seem to be one of those catalysts, easy things to manage, which is tightly related to the utility. And then you mentioned multiple times solar panels, energy storage in the home. So where do you think this is going? How does that all accelerate things?
I think two things. I think cities themselves are becoming a critical component of the decarbonization strategy that we'll see at a state mandate level, because when a state like Texas or Colorado or anywhere else, I guess Colorado's, what was it, Northwest Texas, when Northwest Texas decides to put in place a decarbonization strategy that says they'll be carbon neutral by 2030 and carbon free by 2040. The cities themselves, I think, are going to take on a huge part of that burden, not just from the infrastructure of the city, but obviously the people associated with the city and working for it. So that's one piece of it. That's where the electric vehicles are going to come from. That's where the solar panels are going to come from. That's where all of these things are going to come from. And then I think the second piece is that through those municipalization strategies, we're going to continue to see that at the top level of the system, as we decarbonize the top level of the system, meaning the grid, we're going to see more volatility occurring there. And cities are kind of like this entity that gets squeezed in the middle. And better than anybody from your days at Austin Energy, you're buying from some large generation entity, and then you have these opportunities to go renewable, and you have all these different opportunities. Well, you have this constituency on the other side of that is saying, well, we want clean energy. We want clean energy. We want clean energy. So the city not only is getting pushed regulatorily or legislatively, they're getting pushed by their customers. And so all of those things come together within cities. And I think personally, cities and municipal utilities actually have one of the biggest opportunities, but also probably one of the biggest burdens to actually drive this change pretty rapidly.
Yeah. John, Llewelyn, you're muted, John.
I have some curiosity about this rush to go forward. First of all, again, but not to be argumentative, but you did mention the problem of regulation, and yet probably the most progressive company at the moment technologically is the Southern Company, which is regulated. Deregulation has not been, as far as I can see, and I watched it very carefully from the inception, has not been the boom it was supposed to be. It made money more expensive for the deregulated, and it made them more cautious about investing on cutting edge things. The price of failure went up, and the price of success was not accountable in the same way. So that's just a thought. I don't suggest we're going to re-regulate, but it's an interest.
I would say that's true, Llewelyn, outside of Texas, right?
Texas has got some very substantial municipal generation beyond Austin.
Only Austin and San Antonio, but you know, Texas is really,
San Antonio is right behind you, and it was because of the reluctance of free enterprise to move into Texas electric generation that you have so many municipals. And it's interesting how you get that alternative development. I would point you, for example, to the Salt River project in Arizona, which was developed because big utilities were not interested in providing service in the desert at that time. Now it's a very substantial utility. So there are ways to skin a cat, to coin a phrase, and we're not sure going forward. If you ask me, I would say the limiting factors going forward are how we're going to sustain the production, particularly with a possible shortage of rare earths, of the kind of equipment that is making the new electric grid, which is many, many turbines on windmills, also the production and eventual disposal of both the windmills and of solar panels, which are going to become environmental issues very soon. And the big challenge, in my view, to the utilities is how are they going to get off natural gas, which is the primary generating fuel at the moment, in order to meet their own plans to have a decarbonized future. And I'm not sure how they're going to do that. It looks like a very difficult thing to do.
It is. It is. By the way, I completely agree with many of your comments, Llewelyn, because you know the regulatory model. We can't just magically deregulate everything again and just think it's going to sort itself out. That's probably not going to be the case. Customers will probably lose in that scenario, and it is very regional, very jurisdictional. You know, Texas has their way, Colorado has their way, et cetera. However, I do think one of the big changes now is we're seeing much more legislative level work at every individual state to push for just decarbonization. No matter how we get there, they're pushing that. That is a fundamental change that I think we've seen versus the deregulation status of 15 years ago when we had Enron and others 20 years ago, I guess. The other comment that I wanted to provide was really around this idea that there is multiple ways to skin the cat. The one fear that I have is that we're going to actually come up with 50 different ways to skin the cat because we have 50 states. And so that for a company like ours, that becomes a huge challenge because now it's literally like dealing with the entire European Union all over again. Every country is different, when in reality, these electrons are actually the same. Generally, customer behaviors and patterns are generally the same. So I just hope we don't end up with 50 different ways to actually do that. 4 or 5 would be great, not 50.
I think your defense against the 50 ways, the 50 shades of utility is that there tend to be herd animals. Utilities tend not to go out. There's no incentive for them to go out on a limb because they're not in direct competition with each other. And if anything failed in regulation, it was the idea that there would be consumer competition. There is for commercial and large industrial, but for most people in their homes, the utility is the utility. Some exceptions, but they're not significant. And they certainly don't affect the way utilities think. They're not worried about it. Utilities have one thing which we tend to forget if we're not in the utility business, which is the same reality that air traffic control has. It's real time. You don't have a lot of time to experiment or to play around. You've got to keep the lights on, just as you've got to land the aircraft. And it is very dangerous to do anything that might endanger that. So that I ran some conferences once on alternative businesses in utilities, one with brownfields. And I did these conferences under the umbrella of the Energy Daily, which I had founded and owned. And we found out that when they were able to separate out the brownfields business, they had owned a lot of real estate from downtown generating to bottom land, to top land, to right-of-way land, where they had been able to separate out their real estate interests into a separate entity. They prospered and they did very well. When it was left to be done with somebody's left hand in the C-suite, it didn't work very well. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the concerns I've always had about agglomeration. What goes to the wall? I suspect in many, many instances, new projects go to the wall, and particularly new technologies. Innovation goes to the wall, I suspect, when you get big, satisfied corporations. When they're in turmoil, you get a lot of good stuff come out.
Well, remember that with all of our value structure, there's still 50 ways to leave your lover, if you remember that song. But let me ask you this. We really don't know what the new technology will have on the environment. And all of this stuff needs to be plugged in. And I was just reading a book called The Advanced Smart Grid by a guy named Andre Carvallo, I think. And I think it won like 56 awards for industry. And as we go forward, as we look at where we're heading, we can't plug in electric cars now in America. Mm-hmm. We can't do that. When you plug in an electric car, it's a download. It's not like plugging in a light bulb. When you plug in a bus, it's a download. So I want to ask my distinguished colleague, author of the book, The Advanced Smart Grid, since your book was written, is the grid smarter?
I would say probably 10.
Now, and can we when will we be able to plug in this new America that we talk about with this 1929 jalopy grid that we have?
Yeah, no, the grid edge is far from being smart. You need new transformers, you need new inverters, you need energy storage in the equation, right? And so the EVs are a Trojan horse for putting the storage in the way, right? And the Tesla Powerwalls and other competitor products are the beginning of that. But you need to deploy Imbala software everywhere. You need to change the transformers, you need to change the inverters. So that's a journey that, it's a massive journey, right? I mean, it's 145 million homes, 28 million commercial and industrial buildings. It's not going to happen in one weekend. It's going to take 10, 20 years. And so the question is, which are the inexpensive ways of doing that? So when I saw the announcement of Generac partnering and acquiring Imbala, I thought, wow, that's brilliant, because Generac is highly successful. Roughly the backup generation market in the US is 400,000 units a year. They probably are the #1 market shareholder of that. And so if they can somehow take that into a Trojan horse approach, energy as a service, offer now energy storage, offer solar panels, offer the Imbala aggregation, leverage order 2222, build a new entity under their Imbala brand to do all of that kinds of aggregations. The sky's the limit of that happening, right? And I probably already spill out the beans on some of the things that the Imbala team is working on, but it's I was going to ask you, Bud, what are your thoughts on Order 841 and 2222 coming to life? What's it going to take?
Yeah. So I see 2222 as just like FERC 745 when we saw demand response finally be recognized as a wholesale value product. Mm-hmm. And I think 2222 will do largely the same thing. We still have a lot of work to do to get there, but now again we've got a FERC order that says we can value these distributed energy resources, DER++. Mm-hmm. I also think what I like about 2222 is it recognizes the fact that these assets, again, I'm going to go backwards in time. Demand response was generally viewed as a load drop product, take things off the grid. That's 2222 actually begins to recognize the fact that we may need resources that can take load and actually go in both directions on the grid. And that is this new world that we're going to live in, is devices that are giving and taking throughout the course of the entire day. As a data point, I just saw a report out of Australia, which I don't know how much work you've done around that, but the first time in a very, very long time, I think the first time ever, they had an entire day of energy in southwestern or southeastern Australia was served by solar only,
awesome.
Rooftop solar. And so you want to see the actual beautiful duck curve of all duck curves. It's right there where it literally takes 100% of the load through the day through solar. And guess what's happening? Those loads have to be give and take, give and take, give and take. The batteries have to be give and take in that entire world in order to keep stability in it.
Right.
So that is the future we're headed for. I also agree with you. It's a decades long journey. I've been at this for 2 decades. I guess I got one more left in me, probably something like that. And we're going to get there eventually.
Yeah.
But you may have more than 2 decades left, because I've been doing this for 5 decades and I'm not totally done.
Good point. I shouldn't sell myself short, I guess.
So I would say, gentlemen, that, you know, I continue to be super optimistic that in many ways I look at the half full glass of COVID and what it has created, but I see a lot of interesting new business model changes. I see a lot of mergers and acquisitions. I see a lot of the people that have figured out that there is a rush to the door to get ahead of the game. I think Imbala, in my opinion, being partnered with Generac makes it a totally different ball game. It's probably going to be harder for some of their competitors. It's probably going to be more difficult for any new startup to try to do what they're realizing finally. I think that, you know, those who seize the moment and accelerate and expand their ecosystem to play with all the elements of distributed energy resources in an aggressive fashion. I think that world, as I predicted long time ago in 2008, when I designed something called the Pecan Street, that at some point the edge of the grid would deliver sustainable power that would be carbon free, and it would totally be a beautiful thing, abundancy, all controlled and managed by the owners, by the prosumers of their own destiny, interconnected magically with some miracle software and miracle assets. Maybe it will be the brand of Generac and Imbala coming at you at some point.
Thank you, Andres. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a very, very bright future. We're very excited about the opportunity we have in front of us.
I want to ask about smart meters. When I was on your participating in your conference, Andres, the gentleman from SMUD, whose name escapes me for the moment, he was not impressed with them, and he called them stupid meters.
Yeah, so that gentleman is Paul Lau. This is Digitalization Summit 2019. He's now being promoted to the CEO of the company, and he's right. The meters are kind of stupid.
Okay, well, would you like to tell us why they're stupid, and how has the whole utility industry, with its herd instinct, gone for a stupid device?
I'll let Bud take a crack at it.
Not a metering company. I'm not a metering expert, but I will say, I think one of the challenges is, again, it's this technology curve problem. There was a big early adoption. And of course, we also live in a sort of regulatory driven world, or at least a world that is like the meter always has to be round, and it has to connect like this, and it has to connect like that. And so you don't want to retrofit 146 million homes with a new kind of connection. So you end up in this sort of box that you've got to live in, a round box in this case. And I think that there was a lot of technology that was brought to bear probably pretty early on that didn't create a true smart meter. It created a less dumb meter, is what some people have said. It's just a less dumb meter. Yeah. But I also think we've seen, advancements come a long ways in that industry, where now a smart meter that is sold by Itron or Landis & Gyr or any of these companies out there is actually far more advanced than it was just 5 or 10 years ago. And so this is where, the guys who were not the early adopters, maybe even SMUD falls into this category. I don't know where SMUD and Paul, fit in this world, but when you're third or you're fourth and not the first early adopter, you have the opportunity to get the benefits of all that. And I still think largely the smart metering market has a lot of room to go there, and I'm sure that they ultimately will.
Yeah, I think quickly two points on that. I mean, again, smart meters are a necessary evil. They're the cash register for the utility. They're also the legal demarcation point where the utility assets end and the customer assets begin. And a lot of people have said over time that smart meter shouldn't be a meter anymore. It should be just an asset demarcation connection point, sort of like a junction box of sorts. And the smart meter is really a logical thing that could be calculated with software in some CPU anywhere in the house and maybe at every device, at every plug, at every light socket, and so on. And so the question is, what does that mean? What does that, analog physical meter look like 10 years from now? Do you buy it as a pink router with starch at Walmart, and you use as many as you like, and then you deploy them however you like, or are they embedded in the Imbala software that you're running to manage your distribution assets, right? And so I think that the software route probably is the one that makes sense. The question is, how do you guarantee the quality of that and the cybersecurity of that? But I think that we need a world of real-time controls, and the grid today, outside of the generation grid, doesn't move in real-time controls. It's more of a 5 to 10 second delay, watching things happen in the substation, the control room, and as we move to edge driving generation and everything, you need then comms that are real time. So you need 5G, 6G, and everything that comes after that. And narrow networks are not going to be the answer to all that. But I think there's an affordability problem here, and so everybody wants all that, but they want it cheaper, right? And so I think the challenge has always been, as I told the vendors long time ago when I met them at Austin Energy, which is why I became so popular. As I deployed $4 billion in 8 years, everybody wanted to be my friend. That I want what you're delivering to me today, I want it tomorrow, cheaper, faster, and better. And the key word was cheaper. And so vendors need to live in a world of delivering more for less every year, and that's the only way it's going to happen. If Moore's law doesn't give me the benefits, then why would I do it? And then the other construct that we need to figure it out is that utilities and industrial companies tend to depreciate things longer than 18 months, which is where the consumer electronic, I'm about to buy my new iPhone 12, and because I have an iPhone 11 and I can do it. But utilities will never do that. They're going to wait 7, 10, 20, 30 years to depreciate that asset. And so that makes the fact that, Bud has to wait 12, if they bought somebody else's product, he's going to have to wait 3 or 4 years before he circles back around, right? So that's an unfortunate reality of that world.
I agree with all that. They also have a tremendous fear of stranded assets, which is a constant tension.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call a meter dumb. I would call it a fast idiot. Let's not call it a dumb meter. The Butler term is a fast idiot.
Yeah, I mean,
a fast idiot or two in my life.
I think they're an affordable, somewhat smart meter, but things are going to change. I keep telling you all that 5G is a game changer. You are all going to be revolutionized when we go from 10 billion things connected in the United States to 100 billion things all running on private 5G networks, and everything is going to be outrageously amazing.
Everything falls.
Yep.
Everything falls.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Bud, I want to thank you for spending the day with us, for the hour with us. It's been fantastic to see you. Llewelyn and John, thank you very much. If I didn't see any big questions from the audience, actually no questions from the audience. John, if you're ready to take us away with some inspiration, I don't know what you're going to pick now.
You had not have fallen, and I would not have found you. An angel flying too close to the ground. patched up your broken wing, and I hung around a while, trying to keep your spirits up and your fever down. But I knew someday that you would fly away, for love's the greatest healer to be found. So leave me if you need to, and I will always remember an angel flying too close to the ground.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Bud, for being with us.
Okay, see you guys.
I'm great to be on with you.
It's great.
You as well. Thank you, gentlemen.
All the best. All the best.
Llewelyn, we'll get together on that other